Imagine a world where the dead literally claw their way out of their swampy grave as the result of voodoo magic and start attacking people at random. And it's up to cops, news anchors, and everyday people to figure out what's actually happening. That is the premise of The Living Dead by Jeffrey Goddin, an obscure 1987 novel that does deliver on the scares, but slightly misses the mark on reviving a long-dead zombie motif. Originally published in April of 1987, The Living Dead drops us right in the middle of this southern gothic zombie nightmare. After the undead start emerging from their swampy New Orleans graves, they start randomly attacking people. And it is up to one of our main characters, the police chief, who tracks down the token local voodoo queen to figure out how to stop these attacks. The flip side of this story is we're also following two lovers, Paul and Doucette, who are kind of roped into the chaos because Doucette is having these extremely vivid nightmares about phantoms in the night chasing her, which leads us eventually to the revelation that she has some ancestral connections to the reason behind this sudden reappearance of the undead. Goddin dives right into the zombie action from the get-go and expertly explores the premise of these zombies being the result of voodoo magic and deep supernatural lore, which I found to be a refreshing take on the way overdone zombie genre. To be honest, I never really find myself interested in zombie stories or movies because they're all kind of the same to me and they are extremely overdone. I don't really understand why they're so popular within the horror genre, but Goddin delivers a very refreshing take with this novel. There are a lot of characters in this book, but it's handled well. I was never confused about who was who or what was going on, but I will also argue that the city of New Orleans was in and of itself a character. The vibrant landscape and culture of that very unique pocket of American culture was very closely tied to the story. It almost has to be. If we weren't in New Orleans, which has such a deep-rooted history and voodoo, the zombie reappearance wouldn't even be happening in the first place if we weren't in New Orleans. So the setting was very important to the story taking place. My favorite thing about this novel was the setting of New Orleans. Goddin does an excellent job in painting that picture for us and putting us right in New Orleans in the late 80s. Now, some of you may have had experience with other novels that creates great atmospheric horror and where the setting is just as important to the story as the plot itself. And you might find those to be a little slow. At least I have. I love atmospheric horror, but you kind of have to be in the mood for it. Goddin handles it very well here in the sense that he keeps the action going, keeps you interested, the plot keeps going, while still painting such a vivid and emotional picture of the setting for us. This book definitely had its pockets of horror. In particular, there's a scene at a construction site that I think I will always remember. But as I got further into the book, it started to become more of a police procedural for me because the bulk of the plot revolves around the Cajun police chief teaming up with Paul, the male counterpart of that couple. They team up to kind of track down the voodoo practitioner who's responsible for reviving all these corpses and setting them to attack random citizens of the city. I didn't think I was getting a crime thriller when I picked this up to read it, but that's what we got. And while I did enjoy the story and it kept me interested, I most definitely would have preferred some more horror, violence, gore, something to make it a bit darker. The Living Dead is most certainly an obscure horror find. I don't see a lot of people talking about it on the internet. I had never heard of it until a few months ago, and I was very excited to find it. But the few reviews of this book I did find critique it for introducing multiple characters and then not having anything come to fruition with them, or introducing certain plot elements and nothing really happens with it. That is definitely the case, but I found it useful because the author has to set the stage of these zombie attacks being random. So we're not going to have them attacking our main characters, obviously, or the plot would basically fall apart. So you have to introduce these random citizens and set up a very short backstory for them and kind of set the stage for them to be attacked and killed. And the fact that they're dead is enhancing the plot because people are being killed, but we're not losing our main characters. So I went into this knowing that that was a common critique of this novel, but I found it to be handled very well, and it wasn't distracting at all. It's probably obvious by now that I didn't enjoy this one as much as I thought I was going to. In a previous video on my channel, I mentioned how excited I was to get my hands on a copy of this, and it was one of my most anticipated reads, but it was a little bit of a letdown. However, it's still a good example of some of those buried treasures of horror fiction because the inherent tension between modern society and the rising of ancient lore and the combination of that is something that I don't see a lot, especially in zombie fiction. I also can't get over how refreshing it was to read a zombie story that was based in voodoo, just like classic horror cinema of the late 1920s and 30s, which, as a side note, not only do I like vintage horror fiction, but when it comes to horror movies, I definitely prefer the movies from that era, the black and white era, pre-code especially. And so it warmed my heart a little bit to see more of a modern work of fiction that kind of called back to those tropes from the golden age of horror cinema. As I mentioned previously, my favorite thing about this novel was the setting and Goddin's ability to put us right there in it and feel like we were actually in New Orleans and living this story. That was most definitely my favorite part. And most people, when you talk about bayou horror stories that are set in New Orleans or southern Louisiana, most people are going to think of Anne Rice and the Vampire Chronicles. But little did we know that Jeffrey Goddin was also able to capitalize on this and, dare I say, did a better job than Anne Rice. After finishing the book, I gave The Living Dead 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay, like I said, not my favorite, but the setting and Goddin's handling of New Orleans as a character in and of itself is what kind of pushed it over the edge for me. I would definitely recommend this to you if you are a fan of Southern Gothics, because this is going to have all the elements of that, but it packs more of a punch in regards to the progression of the plot. And that's it for today's review. Let me know if this has kind of turned you off to Jeffrey Goddin, if you have actually read this and have alternative viewpoints. Also, let me know your favorite bayou-themed horror fiction. I've read a lot of it this year, and it is kind of becoming my favorite subgenre in horror, so I definitely want to hear everybody's recommendations. Please do not forget to like and subscribe if you would like to see more, and until next time, have a good one.